Do you have any idea of what the medieval period was like? Well, they say it was a time when spices were worth their weight in gold and cooks were worth their weight in salt. Sounds funny, doesn't it? Cooking food has always been an important activity in human life, and humans have always enjoyed eating fine food. But being a medieval cook was no piece of cake. It involved early mornings, late nights, and a lot of trial and error. In today's video, we'll explore what it was like to be a cook during this period, including their daily routine, the types of food they prepared, and the challenges they faced. So put on your apron, grab your whisk, and let's whip up some gruel because a day in the life of a medieval cook is about to begin. Ready? Let's go! Welcome to Untold History Guy, where you can find fun, fascinating, and sometimes shocking chronicles of history. Join us as we journey back and uncover the untold truths of the past. Daily routine. The day of a medieval cook started so early, they probably had to wake up with the roosters. The cook would begin by chopping firewood, building a fire in the kitchen hearth, and preparing the utensils for the day's cooking. Gathering and preparing ingredients was no small task for a medieval cook. It was like going on a culinary treasure hunt, except the treasure was vegetables, meats, and grains. Next, the cook would start cooking breakfast for the lord of the manor and any guests that may be staying overnight. This would typically include porridge, bread, and ale or wine. Most of the cooking was done in large cauldrons or pots over an open flame, and it required constant attention to prevent the food from burning. After breakfast, the cook would move on to preparing lunch and dinner for the household. This would involve roasting, boiling, and stewing various meats such as beef, pork, or poultry. Vegetables such as turnips, carrots, and onions were also commonly used. Spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and saffron were often added for flavor. In addition to preparing meals, the chef would also have to ensure that there was enough food for everyone in the household, including the servants and any guests. This meant that the cook would have to plan and manage the food supplies carefully to avoid any shortages. But the stakes were high. If the cook ran out of food or served a meal that wasn't up to par, they'd have to face the wrath of the owner of the house and his guests. It was like a medieval version of Hell's Kitchen, where instead of Gordon Ramsay yelling at you, it was the lord of the manor. And let's face it, sanitation and hygiene weren't exactly top priorities back then. As a result, the cook had to be extra careful when washing and sterilizing all utensils and cooking equipment. But hey, at least they didn't have to worry about any health inspections or food safety regulations. The cook just had to rely on good old-fashioned common sense and a lot of elbow grease to keep everything clean. So, here's to the medieval cook, the ultimate kitchen warrior who could chop wood, start a fire, and cook up a storm before the rest of us even hit the snooze button. Food preparation. Food preparation during the medieval period was a labor-intensive process. The cook would have to perform all of the tasks involved in preparing the ingredients, such as cleaning and gutting fish, plucking and dressing birds, and grinding spices. And let's not forget about the meat. It was like a medieval version of a food processor where the cook had to grind it, mix it with spices, and mold it into all sorts of shapes before cooking. The most common dishes included stews, soups, pies, breads, and roasted meats. Stews and soups were particularly popular because they could be prepared in large quantities and stretched out over several meals. These dishes were made with a combination of vegetables, grains, and meats, and they were seasoned with herbs and spices to add flavor. Roasted meat was the ultimate status symbol in medieval times. It was like the Louis Vuitton bag of the culinary world. Only the rich and powerful could afford it. And for good reason too, because roasting meat was no easy feat. The cook had to spend hours slowly roasting the meat on a spit over an open flame, carefully turning it to ensure that it was cooked evenly. The meat had to be properly preserved to prevent spoilage, and this was achieved by salting, smoking, or drying it. Bread was also a common staple in medieval cooking. The chef would have to prepare the dough and bake the bread in a communal oven, which was often located outside of the kitchen. Excellent skills in bread making were required to ensure that the bread was properly risen and cooked. Similarly, pies were also popular, and they were mostly filled with a combination of meats, vegetables, and fruits. The crust, made from a mixture of flour, water, and lard, were also flavored with herbs and spices. You might say that medieval cooks were the OG creators of meat pies, but unlike the modern versions, They didn't have to worry about being judged on the quality of their crust on the Great British Bake Off. Challenges faced. Cooking during the medieval period was not without its challenges, as you can already tell. It was like cooking while blindfolded with your hands tied behind your back. There were no stoves, ovens, or refrigerators, so the cook had to rely on open fires and various cooking implements such as pots, pans, and spit roasting devices. This made it difficult to regulate temperatures and cook dishes evenly. The medieval culinarians did face yet another major challenge, which was the limited availability of ingredients. Since there was no refrigerators, most ingredients had to be obtained fresh on a daily basis. This meant that cooks had to be creative with the ingredients they had available and find ways to stretch them out to make them last longer. Do you know what the most important ingredient was in medieval cooking? It was time! Just kidding. It was actually salt. But time was a close second. Actually, access to spices and seasonings was limited. Many of the spices we take for granted today, such as pepper, cinnamon, and nutmeg, were considered rare and expensive luxury items during the Middle Ages. As a result, cooks had to rely on herbs, such as parsley and thyme, to add flavor to their dishes. Back in medieval times, sanitation and hygiene were so bad that rats and mice had the audacity to take cooking classes. And the cook had to take great care to ensure the food was properly prepared and stored. Lastly, the culinarian had to contend with the expectations of their employers. In a nutshell, they had to be creative and resourceful with the ingredients they had on hand, and they had to be able to adapt their cooking to the tastes and preferences of their employers. Interesting facts. Did you know that chefs would use food dyes to color their dishes in vibrant hues like green, red, and blue? In fact, cooking was often considered a form of art. They also used a variety of presentation techniques, such as sculpting fruits and vegetables into elaborate shapes and arranging dishes in intricate patterns. It was all about making the food look as good as it tasted. It was also common for cooks to create dishes that had both sweet and savory flavors. This was known as mixed taste and was believed to be the ideal way to enjoy food. Some medieval cooks were highly skilled and could be found working for wealthy nobles or even royalty. Their role was considered prestigious by their employers. These cooks would often be sent to foreign lands to learn new culinary techniques and bring back exotic spices and ingredients. Interestingly, some cooks even became advisors to kings and nobles on matters of food and nutrition. The medieval cooks also used spices and herbs for their medicinal properties. For instance, sage was believed to help with digestion, while fennel was thought to improve eyesight. However, these spices were highly valued and were often traded at high prices. This meant that only the wealthy in society could afford them. Another interesting fact is that salt was very important in medieval cooking. It was used both as a seasoning and as a preservative. Unlike today, salt was so valuable that it was often used as currency. Can you imagine that? Cooks had to be highly skilled at food preservation techniques, as refrigeration was not yet invented. Apart from salting, they would also use a variety of other methods, including smoking and pickling, to keep food from spoiling. It seems like medieval cooks had a very adventurous palate. They even used gold leaf in their dishes, which makes me wonder if they were trying to impress royalty or if they just had expensive taste. And eating a swan's heart for good luck? That's definitely not something you see on a modern menu. I guess you could say that medieval cooking was a mix of creativity, superstition, and a willingness to try just about anything. Talk about keeping a secret recipe under lock and key. Using a secret language or code to protect a recipe seems a bit extreme, but I guess it was necessary to safeguard their culinary creations. And using illustrations instead of words? That's a clever way to keep the recipe even more secure. I wonder what other secrets medieval cooks had up their sleeves. And let's not forget about how to deal with the occasional kitchen disaster, like a pot boiling over or a dish burning to a crisp. But with their creativity and resourcefulness, they were able to salvage what they could and turn it into a delicious meal. While we may no longer use some of the ingredients or cooking methods from that time, the legacy of the medieval cook lives on. So the next time you enjoy a delicious meal, take a moment to appreciate the long and storied history of cooking and the many talented chefs who have come before us. Did you enjoy learning about this fascinating part of history? Let us know in the comment section below. Oh, And don't forget to check out our channel for more entertaining content.